Hi, everybody. Hope you're having a good night. I'm having a great one myself. What I'm going to talk about tonight is the Democratic race and how it's going. Now, I'm not going to pretend to be neutral here. I'm very much in the Bernie Sanders corner. The only other person in the race I'm really enthusiastic about is probably Tulsi Gabbard, but I'm not, though entirely sanguine about her chances, okay, at this point. And okay, I also have always had some doubts about the breadth of her policy vision, but I'm not going to go into that now. I'm going to go into the horse race. Now, I normally don't spend a lot of time on the horse race. I talk over the issues and I deal in things that perhaps are more complicated than the horse race. But the horse race is going on, and it's very important to talk about, I think, from time to time. And I also like the views I have about the horse race to get heard. And so this is my vehicle to get them out there. Okay. So I hope you'll indulge me tonight and allow me to do that. So here we go. There have been polls appearing, of course. This morning there was a CBS by YouGov poll. Okay, the YouGov label or name is a label for the Economist, actually. I think the YouGov part of that is the Economist, and they've been relatively scientific in their polling compared to a number of other places, okay, or organizations. But the interesting thing about them, or the polls that they released this morning, is that they cover the first four of the primary states. And the results are very interesting when we look to the top five candidates. In the Iowa poll, Joe Biden is, according to them, standing at 29%. Bernie Sanders is right on his heels with 26%. Also, Warren is at 17%, somewhat behind Bernie. But they're definitely the top three. Now, going down from the top three, we have a 7-point drop to Mr. Buttigieg, Pete, and Pete is at 7%. And Kamala Harris is at 6% in the Iowa poll. So Pete and also Kamala Harris are way back in that poll. And the race currently is a three-way race, but with Warren substantially in back of the other two candidates. Now, there's been a slip in Joe Biden's numbers now for a long time in these states. And we can expect that he's going to slip much further over the next about 3 months or so. So the question arises, who's going to inherit his support, who's likely to inherit his support, and how will the gains actually be divided? And I can't tell you that much about that, but I can say that the information that seems to be coming from most of the polls right now is that both Sanders and Warren are in a good position to inherit the Biden support as his support continues to fall, and that neither one of them has a big advantage over the other in relation to where that support is going to go. But perhaps we can infer some things from the overall picture the polls are presenting right now. And that overall picture has Warren very strong among the demographic, okay, of white voters. Okay, while Bernie Sanders has a good deal of support, okay, among white voters, but also a good deal of support among Hispanics, okay, and blacks as well. That would suggest that Bernie stands to gain some from all three groups, but Warren stands to gain more from the but she stands to gain more from the demographic, okay, of the white voters. So, unfortunately, I can't tell you exactly what that means. I can tell you, okay, that Iowa is a predominantly white state, okay, but Bernie can at least contest with Warren, okay, in that particular demographic, while she can't very well contest with him when it comes to Hispanics and to blacks. That suggests to me Bernie probably has a slight advantage in terms of inheriting support from Biden. That leads me to infer that in Iowa, what's going to happen, okay, is that as Biden slips, okay, that Bernie will go into a lead, that Warren will gain support, but that Bernie's eventual lead over Warren, as Biden say, slips to 20%, is likely to be even larger than it is now, maybe 10, 11, or 12 points, actually going into, let's say, November. It remains to be seen, though, of course, how the October debates are going to affect this. Something else that's very significant in relation to affecting what is going to happen to that support is the campaigning of both Bernie and Warren. Now, I think both campaigns are very, very vigorous, okay, at this time. Warren's in a lot of places, picking up a lot of support, but she's also going behind the scenes to delegates. I don't think she's spending quite as much time on the road in the critical states, okay, as Bernie is. Now, Bernie, in contrast, seems to be really omnipresent in the very early primary states, but also going to many of the later primary states too. He seems to be everywhere. He seems to be flying all over, and he seems to be getting very, very large crowds continuously wherever he goes. The crowds seem to be growing as far as I can tell. Okay, now Warren's crowds, okay, are also growing, and she's doing very well with popular support, certainly. And her support, since she started from a lower base, is currently uh, actually growing faster than Bernie's support. But the question is whether she's going to peak out as a result of the fact that she's not very popular with the black voters and the Hispanic voters. So, is she going to hit a ceiling in her growth sometime soon? I think that's a major question to ask. Now, in New Hampshire, we have Warren ahead at this point in time, at least according to the CBS, YouGov poll. She has 27%, Biden 26%, and Sanders is at 25% right now. Mr. Buttigieg is at 8%, and Senator Harris is at 7%. Okay, so again, with respect to Buttigieg and Harris, their combined total is at 15%, still considerably lower than the lowest of the top three, who's Bernie Sanders, at 25%. Now, in New Hampshire, it seems clear to me that Biden is going to continue to lose support there. The question is whether Warren is going to gain there. Sanders has been aggressively campaigning in New Hampshire, as well as in the other states, that he cares about. Of course, he won there by a wide margin in 2016, and he has a ground game there that's probably the strongest, of any candidate. That suggests that Sanders is going to grow his support, and that as Biden falls, he once again may well be in line, to gain a majority of the support that will come from Biden to some of the other candidates. I think that means that he's going to overtake Warren in New Hampshire. We also have to keep in mind that what happens in the New Hampshire race, or what happens in the Iowa race, I should say, is going to have a dynamic effect with respect to the New Hampshire race. In 2016, when Bernie came so close to winning, in Iowa, that gave him a New Hampshire boost, and he was able to actually get a majority in that particular primary. Now, if he wins in Iowa this time, and as I said, he has a big lead over Warren there, and with Biden likely to fall, Sanders is likely to win in Iowa, depending on how successfully the Democratic machine there is able to influence the caucuses. Of course, they were instrumental in swinging the caucuses over to Clinton in 2016, but they were also blatant about it. There were very, very strange things that happened, in Iowa, including, some of you probably remember, the 6 coin tosses that all went in one single direction, really violating expectations from probability to a very great extent. So I think that's unlikely to happen again. I think, first of all, Bernie will have more on the ground support in Iowa. He's been campaigning very, very vigorously there. And more of his people are probably in the machinery of the state party at this time than they were in 2016. So I expect the rigging there is not going to be as bad as it was in 2016, and that Bernie is likely to have a clear win there. In which case, he'll be going into New Hampshire, okay, as a victor, and I think his ground game is going to make use of that, and Warren will be overtaken in the New Hampshire. So that's my hunch. I'd say watch for the Iowa result and watch the polling in Iowa too, as Sanders seems to be more and more the favorite. Okay, in Iowa, I expect that to have a dynamic effect on the New Hampshire race as well, and to lift Sanders into a higher position in that particular race, only provided that both candidates do equally well in the debates to come. And I fully expect that they both are going to do well, okay, in those particular debates. I don't think that either of them is likely to gaffe. I also think that they are both going to be successful in heading off any challenges from the quarters of the Harris, okay, and the Buttigieg campaigns. I don't think those campaigns have the ground game to actually make inroads into what Sanders and Warren are doing, okay, in Iowa. And I think that's going to put them also behind the eight ball in the New Hampshire primary, okay, as well. Now, what's going to happen to Biden? I think over a period of time, if he gaffes again in debate that's coming up in just a few days, and I shouldn't say if he gaffes again, but if he performs poorly again, because it's not simply gaffes. He doesn't seem to be on top of the material in these debates. He wasn't even on top of the material when he was in the climate forum, and he was just dealing with the questions from the floor. He didn't seem able to handle that. So I see him continuing to go down in New Hampshire, okay, as well. Now, let's then go to South Carolina, because the next of the primaries is in South Carolina. Now, right now, Biden has a big lead in South Carolina. According to the CBS, okay, and YouGov results this morning, Joe Biden is still at 43% in South Carolina, and Bernie Sanders is at 18% in South Carolina. Warren's at 14% in South Carolina. Harris is at 7% in South Carolina. And Buttigieg is only at 4% in South Carolina. Okay, I don't see Buttigieg really being able to make a run at it in South Carolina. Okay, her positions, his positions are similar to Harris's, and I don't see why South Carolinians ought to prefer him to Harris. Okay, the black vote in South Carolina, of course, is very, very important, and the policies, okay, of Buttigieg are not that far different from Harris's actual policies. I think their donors overlap but considerably, and the images they convey are a little similar too. So if she makes a run at it in South Carolina, which she has to do to stay in the race, I think, okay, that Buttigieg will not be able to compete with that. Okay. Now, of course, things may happen to Harris before South Carolina. It may be that further attacks from Tulsi Gabbard, okay, are going to do her in. Maybe other candidates will attack her record, and maybe Buttigieg will, and maybe he can be as successful at it as Tulsi was. So maybe he can out compete her there, but I doubt that. Okay. Okay. So I think what's going on is, depending on what happens in Iowa, okay, and in the New Hampshire primary, I think either Sanders or Warren, okay, or both, are going to be seen as much more viable candidates than they are right now. Okay, and in particular, if Biden's support in South Carolina can fall to, let's say, 25%, and Sanders can win the Iowa, uh, I'm sorry, I put this, okay, in the wrong way. If Sanders can win, okay, in Iowa, as I think he will, and if he can win in New Hampshire, as I also think he will go to South Carolina with the head of steam. Okay, at that point, he will have proven to people that he can win and that he is more electable than people now think that he is. If that happens, I think South Carolinians, and in particular the black vote in South Carolina, is going to quickly migrate over to Sanders and maybe to Warren, as it quickly migrated in 2008 from Clinton to Obama. So in other words, we've seen that before. We've seen a migration from one candidate to another very quickly on the part of voters in South Carolina, when one candidate was able to prove that they are just as viable or more viable than a second candidate, okay, as Obama was able to prove in 2008. If Sanders can prove that in 2020, I think you're going to get a similar migration in South Carolina to Sanders. Now, I think Sanders is much more likely to get such a migration than Warren is. The reason being because but right now, Warren's support seems highly concentrated in the demographic, okay, of whites and blacks. She doesn't seem very popular with blacks. We know that in South Carolina, that as we know from previous polling in South Carolina, okay, that among blacks, the second choice to Joe Biden is overwhelmingly Sanders, okay, as opposed to Warren. So I expect to see Sanders as much more successful in inheriting the Biden vote in South Carolina. Now, again, why I think that there will be a Biden vote to inherit in South Carolina is because if Sanders does well in the first two states, then many of those Biden voters are going to migrate to Sanders. I see capability of Biden to quickly fall, okay, to the neighborhood of 20 to 25% in South Carolina. If that happens, okay, I see Bernie as inheriting most of that and rising to 38 to 40% in South Carolina. And so I see Bernie then, in that case, coming out of South Carolina with a very strong victory and going into Nevada with a very strong victory. Okay, now, then what's going to happen in terms of the Nevada primary? Well, Bernie's already ahead with 29% in that primary. And Biden has 25%, and Warren has 18%. At this time, Bernie has an 11-point lead, 11-point lead in that state. And remember, Hispanics tend to prefer Sanders to Warren. And of course, Hispanics are very important when it comes to Nevada. So if Biden falls off, because based on the first three of the primaries, the electability, okay, of Biden is in doubt, okay, much more in doubt compared to Sanders, then again, Sanders is going to inherit the Biden vote in that state, and he's going to have a chance to rise to 40 to 45%, perhaps even to a majority of the vote within Nevada primary. I can easily see that happening if he comes out of the first three primaries with a head of steam. He could be the one to blow everyone else out of the water when it comes to Nevada. Okay. I didn't properly go over the Nevada results. They are Sanders has 29% and Biden 25%. Warren is at 18%. Harris is now at 6% there, and also Buttigieg is only at 4% there. And Beto O'Rourke even sneaks in there at roughly 3%. So it doesn't seem to me that Buttigieg or Harris, okay, or O'Rourke have much chance there. Harris is not very popular with Hispanics, okay, as well. So if anybody rises there with respect to those three, seems to me that, okay, it might be Beto who's going to rise somewhat, maybe to 6 or 7, okay, or 8% there. But I think Biden is going to fall if Sanders comes out of a head of steam with the first three. I think Biden is surely to fall by a lot, maybe by 10 points or something like that. And most of that would be inherited by Sanders there. So Sanders has a very good chance to get in the 40 to 50 point range coming out of the Nevada primary. And based on the analysis I just have given you, I think Bernie has a very good chance to sweep the first four primaries and then go into Super Tuesday in California with a huge lead over the other contenders. At that point, what happens in California is going to be critical. But of course, the first four primaries will have a dynamic effect on the California race. And Bernie is very strong in California, as it is. And he seems to be out there every 2 weeks at least, campaigning in one or another part of the state. and campaigning to huge crowds all the time. I think he's stronger and stronger with activists in the state organization there. And unless we can have major gains by Tulsi between now and then, the people on the left in the Democratic Party in California are not going to have anywhere to go except to Bernie. So it strikes me that he's going to go into California very, very strong. I don't think Warren can compete as well out there as he can compete. Now, maybe she'll be helped because, boy, by that time, the establishment will be totally panicked. Totally panicked. And they're already giving signs that they're beginning to place all their bets on Warren. Okay. Now, with Biden still in the race as he is in the first three and in South Carolina, they still have to contend with him and getting some of his voters to go over to Warren. But Biden and Warren so far haven't been sharing the same demographics in the same way, okay, because it seems that Warren is still stuck, okay, in the predominantly white demographic. So she doesn't seem to have much in the way of transracial appeal. And she seems to have a class-based appeal where the very educated and very middle class and upper middle class people find her to be very compatible with their values and their conception of what a president should be. I expect things to go on that way. I expect that the establishment throwing their support but to Warren is not going to bring blacks and Hispanics over to her. I don't think it's actually going to be effective to do that. So, what I'm saying here tonight, and I know this is an outlier, and people are going to come up with a lot of analyses that run counter to this one, and also with a lot of analysis that are very plausible as to what is likely to happen, and that they will give you all kinds of reasons why this can never happen. But I think that the way things are shaping up based on the state level results, that if they come out as I think they're going to at this point, and if that head of steam gets in back Bernie Sanders for the California race, and he comes out of California with a big win there, and if Harris can be kept to less than 15%, in California, I think we could very well end up with a split out there where Sanders and Warren are splitting most of the delegates, and Sanders is getting a majority of the California votes on the first round at the convention, and the same in the other states, and that after California and after Super Tuesday, this may yet turn into a runaway for Bernie. Now, of course, people will say, I'm wishful thinking, it's because I'm a Bernie supporter, and blah, 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 blah. Yes, I grant that. And all this could be due to the lenses I'm wearing, which are very Sanders-like. Okay. Certainly very much so. But for what it's worth, I honestly think that this could happen. Now, right now, also this morning, or recently anyway, There was an ABC News Washington Post poll where the data was gathered from September 1st to 5th that has a margin of error of 5.5%, where Joe Biden slipped from July 1st, I guess, or was it from June 1st? I forget, to the present situation. Joe Biden slipped from 29 to 27. Bernie Sanders slipped from 23% to 19%. Where Warren gained, where she went up from 11% to 17%. Harris went down from 11% to 7%, where there was no gain for the Mayor Buttigieg, who came in at 4%, and where Tulsi Gabbard got to 2%, the third of the four polls she needs, where she got to 2%. So right now, she's only one poll away from getting into the debates in November. Okay, so that was good news for her. But as a national poll, that poll seems to be showing that Bernie was slipping somewhat and Warren was gaining and going into a strong 17%, and that Biden was still continuing to slip. Now, I still have to look at the underside of those polls to see what the sampling was like. But at the same time, okay, assuming that that was a valid poll and not a biased poll, okay, against Bernie, which I think is very likely since it came from ABC News, okay, and WAPO. But apart from that, even granting the findings were as they were, okay, in this particular poll, those are not the state polls. These contests are state by state contests. So this national poll does not mean very much when it comes to what's going on in the individual states. Now, when it comes to campaigning, what Bernie is doing is campaigning in those states. Okay? So, that's where the impact of his campaigning is most visible, in those first four states and in California. Now, he's been going to other states as well. I mean, certainly, he seems to be everywhere. But at the same time, the primary efforts are going into Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina, and California. And he's doing a lot in all of those states, more than he's doing in many of the other states. He's concentrating on a sweep of the first five states. Okay. So, I don't think this slippage in the ABC and WAPO poll really should be overly interpreted as a national slip for Bernie. Not when he's doing so well in those key first states that are going to be able to shift opinion across quite a few other states once the primaries actually start. Okay, it's also a state with a big margin, of error. So I wouldn't read actually too much into that, except that Warren is rising in support. I think that's a valid finding. That's what's been going on across the nation. She's running a very good campaign. a strong one, and she's in the end going to be difficult for Bernie to beat. But I still see Bernie as the favorite. I think that's what's going to happen. And I tried to tell you here how I think it is going to happen. Now I'll shift over to Facebook and see what you think about all this. So you saw a message on my screen, okay, from Robin Halsey, who's here tonight, who looks at an article this morning which appeared in the New York Times, which is trashing the Green New Deal, from Bernie. That there was such a response from the New York Times does not at all surprise me. I haven't had a chance, to read it. I certainly will read it, and I'll certainly get back to you on it. I don't know whether it will be tomorrow or Wednesday or Thursday, but sometime this week I'll probably have a chance to actually absorb the Times article and tell you what I think about it. I don't have any first impressions. about it. And Russell says Warren is in the white and 45 and older demographic, from what I understand. Yeah, that's my understanding, as well, Russell. And I think that she's doing so well in the ABC, in WAPO poll that we just were talking about, because they are oversampling in the white and 45 and older demographic. I think they're oversampling that. They have been, actually, from the beginning of this campaign, and I bet that they're probably continuing to do so, and that's why they're getting the particular result they are getting. But we'll have to see if that is true. Okay, are there any more comments? Or questions? I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts on this because you're probably watching the polling as closely as I, about now. I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts on this because you're probably watching the polling as closely as I. Mm. Mm. Okay, please share, like, and subscribe this. And please become a patron at www.patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. Okay, please share, like, and subscribe this. And thank you very much for anything you would care to do. Remember, even $1 a month helps. I'll go back now and see if you've had a chance to say anything more. Russell says, sheepdogging with Warren is a concern for me. Oh, you think that Warren is sheepdogging for the establishment, at this point? Russell says that she's trying to run as the candidate, of the establishment. And she means to have an administration that limits the scope of the revolution that we need to cope with the climate emergency. Is that what you're driving at, Russ? Limits the scope of the revolution that we need to cope with da, 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 da. Took the words out of my mouth, says Russ. Thank you, Russ. Okay, anybody else have any comments? Okay, I should say, okay, I think that is what's going on. I mean, I can hardly account for the meeting, the confidential meeting that Warren is reported to have just had, okay, with Hillary Clinton, as well as some of the other signals she's been sending lately. Of course, there is her insistence that while she's not taking any money from the corporate donors now, that if she wins the primary, she's going to start to take money from the corporate donors. So she's telling us she's going to, if she wins the presidency, she's saying, if I win the presidency, I'm going to be beholden to the corporate donors. That's what she's telling us. She's going to, if she wins the presidency, she's saying, if I win the presidency. So tell me, I'm going to be beholden. So what happens when someone says, okay, I'm running in this primary and I'm not taking any money from the corporate donors. So at the point I win the primary, I won't be beholden to the corporate donors at that point. So you can count on me to do what? Because if she wins the primary, she's still not going to represent anything because she won't have office. So then she's saying, I won't be beholden to donors then. But if I should run for president, if I run for president, okay, and I win the presidency from Trump, then he'll be beholden to his corporate donors and I'll be beholden to my corporate donors. And for all I know, they might even be the same corporate donors, right? I mean, that's what she's telling us. Why does that make sense? Why does it make any sense at all for us to vote for someone in the primary who says that? I mean, it was honest of her to say that. Why does it make any sense at all for us? But that's all I can say for it. From my personal point of view, I'd much rather have a candidate who says, I'm not taking any corporate donations. I'm not going to take any. I'm just not going to take any. That's out of bounds for my campaign. There are people saying that. There's Bernie. There's Tulsi. I mean, they're both saying that. So what's wrong with Warren? I'm not going to unilaterally disarm, she says. Right. But you're going to unilaterally be beholden to corporate donors, right? I'm not going to unilaterally disarm, she says. I mean, that's really funny. Right. But you're going to unilaterally be. Okay, any more comments or questions? Okay, if there are no more, then I'm going to say good night. I have some additional work to do tonight. I'll be here again tomorrow at roughly 9 o'clock, okay, or so. I may be talking about the Times article, okay, at that time. I may also be talking about, okay, an article that appeared in The Intercept, dealing with Glenn Kessler, who is the fact checker for the Washington Post. Maybe I should say the so called fact checker for the Washington Post. So called fact checker for the Post. And if you come tomorrow, you'll see why I say so called fact checker for the Post. So very so called. So, hope to see you tomorrow. Hi, Margot. Nice to see you here. Unfortunately, I'm just about to leave, but you can see me tomorrow night at roughly 9 o'clock. Hi, Margot. Nice to see you here. Okay, last call for questions or comments. I'll take another drink here to give you some time to make them. Again, please like, share, and subscribe this analysis. I don't think there are many people now predicting that the first five of the primaries are going to actually produce a situation where Bernie is the clear front runner in the campaign. So remember, you heard it here first. You heard it here first. I see a scenario where Bernie becomes the sole front runner in the campaign after the first five of the primaries and Super Tuesday. So good night, and I'll see you then. I have no idea why my numbers are growing right now. I don't know what ended and what started, but okay, I'll see you tomorrow. Good night, Dale.